If you ask the United Nations Environment Program how much money is currently sitting in private nature finance, they will hand you a report that says it is roughly $23.4 billion.
Right.
But if you walk down the hall and look at a tally compiled by the UN's own finance initiative, which tracks what they call nature-badged assets, that exact same metric suddenly jumps to $102 billion.
It's just wild.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at an $80 billion accounting black hole.
It is a staggering discrepancy, and honestly, it tells us everything we need to know about the current fractured state of this market.
I mean, hold on. $80 billion is not a rounding error. How do two arms of the exact same international body look at the exact same market and get numbers that are practically in different universes?
Because they aren't actually looking at the same thing. What's fascinating here is that a gap of that magnitude from 23 billion to over 100 billion is not a measurement error.
Yeah.
It's a confession. It is a loud, glaring confession that the entire field of nature finance has been operating on totally different taxonomies. I mean, unaudited public flows, entirely self-reported claims.
Just everyone making up their own rules.
Exactly. For the last decade, practitioners have been obsessed with arguing about the size of the asset class. But what we are seeing right now is a massive realization. Arguing over the headline number is utterly pointless if you don't have the underlying foundation to prove what those numbers actually represent.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you are trying to sell a multi-million-dollar estate.
Okay.
But you and the buyer sit down at the closing table and you literally cannot agree on whether the contract is written in US dollars, euros, or like monopoly money.
Right.
You can't even agree on what a house is. One person thinks it's the physical building and the other person thinks it includes the entire neighborhood. I mean, that is nature finance right now.
That's a perfect way to look at it. And it brings us to the core of what we are analyzing today. The era of just pointing to a headline number and assuming the market will follow is, well, it's over.
Exactly. And that is why today's sources are so vital. We are relying on an industry briefing titled NBS Praxis, dated June 13th, 2026.
A really crucial document.
Yeah, and our mission for you on this deep dive is to hand you a completely new playbook for how this industry actually functions today. We are moving far away from the glitzy environmental pitches, and we are jumping straight into the unglamorous, highly lucrative world of government accounting.
The plumbing.
Yes, the plumbing. Because to make those billions of dollars mean something, the industry is quietly rebuilding the entire financial foundation.
And, to understand how that foundation is being built, we first had to understand why the old system, the traditional way of pitching a nature project, is fundamentally broken.
Right, because for years it felt like nature finance was fighting a war for basic legitimacy. You had project developers out there passionately pitching the intrinsic value of biodiversity.
Yeah, heavy emotional appeal.
Exactly. They were trying to convince people that nature was worth saving, relying on narratives, wildlife photography, and big promises of carbon sequestration.
Yes, they were selling a narrative to environment ministries. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, environment ministries do not have the checkbook.
No, they don't.
The target audience has shifted entirely. The buyer for nature projects today is no longer an environment ministry. It is a finance ministry. It's a national treasury.
Wait, I need to push back on that.
Sure.
Treasuries are notoriously rigid. Central bankers are incredibly risk-averse. A wetland or a forest is deeply unpredictable, right? I mean, it floods, it changes, species die off, wildfires happen.
It's messy.
Very messy. So why would a strict, numbers-obsessed central banker ever agree to put a highly volatile swamp onto their pristine national ledger?
Because that swamp is already affecting their national ledger, whether they acknowledge it or not.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. A finance ministry needs accounts, not narratives. They do not fund press releases. They fund line items on a spreadsheet.
Right.
Treasuries care about risk, asset depreciation, and avoided costs. If a storm surge wipes out a coastal city, the Treasury pays for the recovery.
They've put the bill.
Exactly. If a wetland could have absorbed that storm surge, that wetland has a highly specific, calculable fiscal value.
Ah, I see.
But, and this is the crucial part, if you walk into a treasury with a beautiful pitch deck about saving endangered birds in that wetland, you will walk out empty-handed. They don't have an accounting code for endangered birds.
So the scarce skill for a professional today isn't originating a cool conservation deal or even, verifying the ecological science behind it.
No, not anymore. The most valuable skill in the market right now is translation.
Translation.
Right. It is the ability to render a living, breathing ecosystem into the rigid, standardized accounting categories that a Ministry of Finance already uses to manage the national budget.
Okay, so if the game has moved from the glossy presentation to the back office ledger, the immediate question is, how on earth do you actually do that? Like, how do you get a forest or a mangrove or a peatland onto a national balance sheet?
Well, this is exactly what was happening at the World Bank's 8th Global Policy Forum on Natural Capital.
Right. We saw that in the briefing.
Yeah, it took place in Bangkok on June 9th and 10th of this year.
And what blew my mind about this event was the guest list. You hear Natural Capital Forum, and you naturally picture a room packed with conservationists in cargo pants and hiking boots.
Right.
But the room was actually full of finance ministers, central bankers, and institutional investors.
Because the subject wasn't conservation. The explicit goal of this forum was figuring out the mechanics of how natural capital accounts actually enter macroeconomic and fiscal decision-making.
Which brings up the phrase macro-fiscal infrastructure. We hear this jargon a lot in these briefings. Break that down for me.
Sure.
What does it actually look like when a government treats a forest the exact same way it treats a highway?
Let's use your highway example. A treasury knows a highway depreciates.
Right.
They know it requires an annual maintenance budget, and they know it facilitates a specific dollar amount in economic trade.
Right, standard asset management.
Exactly. To treat nature as macro-fiscal infrastructure means an accountant does the exact same math for an ecosystem.
Wow.
They don't measure the biodiversity, they measure the avoided cost and the economic yield.
So it's pure economics.
Pure economics.
Sure.
If a mangrove forest absorbs a wave, what is the exact dollar value of the property damage that didn't happen? How much would it have cost to build a concrete seawall to do the exact same job?
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. That replacement cost and that avoided damage becomes the mangrove's official asset value on the sovereign balance sheet.
It is such a brilliant, quiet power move. Instead of nature being this fragile, nice-to-have green annex that gets tacked onto a budget if there's leftover money, it becomes a hard asset.
And this raises an important point about geography, actually. The focus in Bangkok was heavily on the ASEAN region, Southeast Asia.
Right.
This region holds some of the world's most efficient, globally significant carbon sinks, particularly their mangroves and peatlands.
Yeah, massive potential there.
But those things only get funded and they only stay permanently protected if they sit on a treasury's books.
Because if they aren't on the books, they're just empty land. And empty land in a developing economy is just waiting to be paved over and developed.
Precisely. The permanence problem in Southeast Asia is not about a lack of ecological science. I mean, we know how peatlands work.
Right.
The problem is governance, land tenure, and fiscal discipline. This forum in Bangkok was run right alongside a major commercial banking sustainability event.
Oh, really? That can't be a coincidence.
It wasn't a coincidence at all. It was about creating a direct bridge between global accounting standards and domestic financial practice in Thailand and across the broader ASEAN bloc.
Okay, so let's say you've done the hard work. You attended the forum in Bangkok, you worked with the accountants, and you now have a fully officially recognized number for your mangrove forest sitting on a treasury ledger. The battle's won, right? You just sit back and wait for the check to clear.
Not quite.
No.
Having a number on a ledger is really just the first step. Think about your own personal budget.
Okay.
Just because you acknowledge you need to save for retirement doesn't mean the money automatically moves from your checking account.
Fair point, unfortunately.
Right. Treasuries ignore ledgers all the time when political priorities shift. That recognized number needs a specific place in a national budget to actually get executed, and that requires tracking frameworks.
Right, which brings us to National Adaptation Plans, or NPs.
Yes.
The sources highlight some incredible data from the NMP Global Network. They recently did a synthesis of 57 submitted national adaptation plans from countries all over the world.
It's a really comprehensive data set.
It is. And the good news is that every single one of those 57 plans contains at least one nature-based solution or ecosystem-based adaptation action.
The ambition is clearly there. At a policy level, governments have formally recognized that nature needs to be part of the plan.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting, out of all those 57 plans that confidently name a nature-based action, only a minority, just 39%, specify an actual implementation timeline or a monitoring roadmap.
And that is exactly the problem we're talking about. The gap in nature finance is no longer about getting nature recognized in a policy document. The gap is execution discipline.
Give me a concrete example. What is the difference here between a wish list and an actual pipeline?
Well, a wish list is a national adaptation plan that says, we will protect our coastal mangroves to reduce flooding.
Sounds great on paper.
It sounds wonderful, but it has no timeline, no tracking metrics, and no monitoring roadmap. A finance ministry looks at that and sees a vague concept.
And they can't fund a concept.
Exactly. They cannot fund a concept. A pipeline, on the other hand, says we will disperse $5 million annually to achieve a 10% canopy cover increase in coastal mangroves by 2028, monitored via satellite imagery every third quarter to achieve a verified 15% reduction in flood risk.
Ah,
Now that is an indicator, and a treasury can absolutely fund an indicator.
precisely. And for you listening, this is a critical pivot in how you must approach your job. The unit of engagement right now is the national plan.
Yeah.
The product you are selling is not the wetland. The product is an indicator that a finance ministry can fund against.
That's a huge shift in mindset.
Yeah, it really is. To align your project with national adaptation plan requirements, you must map your ecological data to those specific fundable indicators. You have to provide the tracking framework that proves the risk reduction year over year in a language the national budget already monitors.
It's about bridging the gap between a nice idea and a fundable reality.
Yes.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate again for a second.
Huh.
Let's say I have my ledger value from Bangkok. The Treasury agrees my mangrove is worth $50 million.
Great.
I also have my rigorous monitoring roadmap baked into the National Adaptation Plan. But then a massive global recession hits.
The national budget is instantly slashed. Isn't my beautiful, ledger-approved, tracked nature project still the very first thing a finance minister cuts to save the hospital or the military budget?
That is the ultimate fear. And that is exactly why the process cannot stop at planning. You have to write nature into hard infrastructure standards.
Yes. The sources take us to a UNESCO conference in Brussels, which was run as part of the EU-funded NBS IMPRA project.
A really pivotal event.
Yeah, and the entire goal of this gathering of UN agencies and European institutions wasn't to announce some new flashy green fund. It was entirely procedural. They were working to get nature-based solutions written directly into critical infrastructure resilience standards.
Think about why that matters from an auditor's perspective. When a finance ministry appraises a public investment, they don't just guess.
Right.
They use very strict, standardized appraisal frameworks.
Let's expand on that seawall versus wetland analogy from earlier. Imagine a city auditor looking at two proposals. Proposal A is a $10 million concrete seawall. Proposal B is a $10 million restored mangrove. Historically, the mangrove was seen as a charity donation. The auditor would scrutinize the seawall's engineering specs, but they'd look at the mangrove and say, well, we can't guarantee the trees will survive a freeze, so we value this at zero.
Exactly. But under these new Brussels standards, the goal is to force that auditor to run the exact same risk reduction formula on the roots of the mangrove as they do on the rebar and the concrete.
That's wild.
It changes everything. If a public investment appraisal looks at a restored wetland the exact same way it looks at traditional gray infrastructure, nature stops competing as this fragile green add-on that just relies on political goodwill.
It becomes a defensible, permanent piece of public investment. You do not cut the seawall budget when a hurricane is coming. And if the wetland is legally classified as standard infrastructure, you cannot cut that either.
Right. And if we synthesize this whole sequence for everyone listening, you can see the exact chronological path from a practitioner's initial claim to a Treasury's final approval.
Walk us through it.
It is a three-step journey. First is accounting, which we saw in Bangkok. This gives the ecosystem a hard financial number based on avoided costs that a Treasury actually recognizes.
Okay, step one.
Second is planning, seen in the national adaptation plans. This gives that recognized number a specific place in the national budget via execution tracking tools.
Got it.
And third is standards, which we saw in Brussels. This gives the project a permanent, uncuttable seat in the country's public infrastructure appraisal process.
Accounting, planning, standards. It makes perfect sense when you trace the causality like that.
It does.
But so, what does this all mean for you listening tomorrow morning? Knowing how international standards connect an individual nature project to a sovereign national balance sheet is incredibly cool theory.
Sure.
But how does a professional actually apply this to their daily work? Like, how do you shift from being a deal pitcher to someone who actually builds this new accounting foundation?
It really comes down to vocabulary and focus. If you are developing a nature project today, there are three core concepts from these briefings that you must absolutely master to speak the Treasury's language.
Let's hear them.
First, you must master natural capital accounts. You can no longer frame nature as an environmental amenity. You must be able to calculate its value as macro fiscal infrastructure.
Stop talking about beautiful scenery. Start calculating asset depreciation and avoided storm damage costs. Got it.
Exactly. Second, you must master monitoring roadmaps. You have to know how to convert a broadly named environmental action into a rigorous, timeline-driven execution indicator that slots perfectly into a country's national adaptation plan.
Moving from the press release to the measurable pipeline.
Yes, and third, you must master public investment appraisals.
Right.
You need to understand exactly how civil engineers and state auditors value hard concrete defense. And you need to ensure your ecological data aligns perfectly with those identical risk reduction formulas.
This is a radical shift in the required skill set for the industry. And we are seeing signals that governments are prepping capital for this exact shift.
We definitely are.
For instance, the sources note that Global Affairs Canada recently ran a consultation signaling a continued integrated climate-nature funding window. And this builds on an existing 5.3 billion Canadian dollar commitment.
That's a massive amount of capital.
It is,
Yeah.
but, and this is a huge but, that money is just a commitment right now. It is a signal, not a disbursement. The real test for practitioners isn't going to be scrambling to grab that cash today.
No.
The real test is going to be at the upcoming industry events where these hard standards are finally being locked in.
The calendar through the end of 2026 is completely full of these highly procedural convenings.
Yeah, the briefing highlights one in particular, actually. The Nature-Based Solutions International Congress happening at Sorbonne University in Paris this November.
Right.
It's drawing over 500 researchers, policymakers, and city representatives. It is being organized by major European players like Biodiversa Plus and Network Nature.
Some heavy hitters.
Absolutely. And it's basically the ultimate testing ground for whether the field can turn all this procedural progress into an actual unified method that the global market adopts.
If you want to see where this foundation is being finalized, that Paris Congress is the room to watch.
Definitely.
Because the panels there won't be about announcing new billion-dollar funds. The intense debates will be about agreeing on the exact formulas for monitoring, accounting, and infrastructure appraisal.
So, to synthesize the core takeaway for you today, stop competing on the pitch and start competing on the ledger.
Well said.
The portfolios that are going to win the next decade of nature finance are not the ones with the most emotional wildlife photography. They will be the ones whose claims are already fully legible to the accounting categories, tracking frameworks, and infrastructure standards of national treasuries. You have to learn to speak the unglamorous language of the back office.
It is incredibly slow, tedious procedural work.
Yeah.
It lacks the instant gratification of a traditional flashy deal announcement.
Oh, for sure.
But this unglamorous layer is exactly where durable, permanent demand is manufactured. Capital has already decided that nature is an asset class. Translating that asset into standard fiscal language is the opportunity right now.
The accounting is the product.
Yes.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on this entire idea of putting nature on a sovereign balance sheet.
Yeah.
Let's say you do everything we talked about today. You successfully hardwire a massive mangrove ecosystem or an ancient forest into a nation's ledger. It is officially appraised as macro fiscal infrastructure.
Right.
What happens if that ecosystem is destroyed by a massive wildfire or completely wiped out by corporate negligence, like a massive oil spill?
That's a terrifying prospect.
It really is. If nature is now a hard financial asset on the government's books, does the country's sovereign credit rating instantly get downgraded when it burns?
Wow.
And if the country's borrowing costs go up because of that downgrade, who ultimately foots the bill for the national debt? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.